Gerda and ik were many times we were in Ukraine.
And we learned a lot. We started working in Ukraine already, I think it was 2004, the first time I came to Kiev. And well, then you are introduced as an expert, but more and more we learn that also in Ukraine we experience the same difficulties. We have the same problems. There's not a huge difference between the experiences of professionals in the institutions in Ukraine and institutions in the Netherlands.
Yeah, and a lot of principles, which also international the same. And it's the principle of being included and incarcerated in closed institutions and the effect of that on development. Because we're talking here about young people who have to develop themselves and to cope with the things that went wrong and to be able to get a new future. And that's an international issue we encounter everywhere. So also in our meetings with you, we learn a lot just by exchanging and sharpening our view on this sort of very important issues.
Yeah. In our presentation, we will tell you about how we approach children in the free society and in the juvenile institutions, because we are convinced also juveniles in the institutions belong to the society and they have to come back to the society. And parents and children cannot always do it alone. So I think an important saying is that you need a village to raise a child. And we will tell you about it, how we do that in the Netherlands. And we hope you can learn of it and you find our presentation very interesting. I'm Gerda van het Hoff. I'm criminologist and former strategic advisor of the correctional institutions in the Netherlands. I'm retired now, but I'm still active, amongst others for Friends of Preluki, a foundation that supports professionals working in colonies for juveniles in Ukraine. In connection with this presentation, it's also worth mentioning that I'm also a volunteer for a theatre group that works with children and who are in a disadvantaged situation. I'll come to that later in my presentation. I'd like to start with a brief overview of juveniles in the Netherlands. Then I'll tell you about the program Peaceful Neighborhoods, in particular the way it is applied in the neighborhood I live in, and that's Amsterdam Part East. After my presentation, Marijke van Genabeek will introduce herself, and in her presentation she will tell you about the approach in the correctional institutions for juveniles and how young offenders are being prepared to become full participants in the society after their release. The Netherlands has 17 million inhabitants. 5 million of them are between 0 and 25 years old. The vast majority of the Dutch belong to the middle class. They are neither very rich nor poor. They have a good life. Yet, 6.5% of children belong to a welfare family, meaning that the family lives on social assistance and some live even below poverty line. An important characteristic of the Dutch society is that we are a multicultural society. 27% of the children have a migrant background. In Amsterdam alone live more than 140 nationalities. Amsterdam is a multicultural city since the Middle Ages. If we look at criminality among youth, it stands out that 15 till 18 years old is the top group. On this slide, you can see the percentages of young perpetrators that have reduced since 2008 from 7.5 till 1.8% in 2018. Also, the percentages of victims among youth reduced. But please notice that the percentage of victims is much higher than that of perpetrators. Compared to seniors, the chance of becoming a victim at a young age is even twice as much. I would like to make special mention of cybercrime, contemporary crime, increasing rapidly, that takes serious forms and can damage a child for life. You may think of extortion, bullying, sexting, or all three at the same time on a child. This slide is about juveniles in the correctional institutions. In the Netherlands, we have a total capacity of 420 places spread over 3 government institutions and a few private ones. Each year, about 1,430 juveniles stay in one of the institutions. Around 48% are there pre-trial, 9% are punished by detention, and around 42% have a mandatory treatment order, which means they are being treated for a developmental disorder. As you can see, pre-trial and detention of juveniles on average does not last long, 27 and 80 days respectively. Mandatory treatment, however, can last up to 6 years and 1 year conditional. Netherlands is a fantastic country, but of course we also have problems and social clashes, especially in the back neighborhoods in the big cities. There can be a multitude of obstacles for children: poverty, criminality, poor housing, language delay, or parents who find it difficult to cope with their situation. An accumulation of factors prevents children to grow up as healthy and full citizens. Therefore, much is being done to promote a healthy lifestyle, education, language education in particular, the integration of migrants, and the support and protection of children and juveniles in general. A lot is being done, but in this context, I would like to tell you about the program Peaceful Neighborhoods, for which I'm active as volunteer myself. This program is applied in neighborhoods in about 10 cities, including the neighborhood I live in, Amsterdam, the eastern part. And I'd like to tell you about this example. The starting point of the program Peaceful Neighborhoods is the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child." It's not always easy for parents to raise children, especially in cities in Amsterdam, a beautiful city, but also less beautiful things are going on. We find it important to give children resistance to the temptation of the big city, to teach them to deal with children with sometimes completely different cultures, and to raise them as responsible and democratic citizens. What we aim is a peaceful neighborhood with a safe climate for children to grow up. The program Peaceful Neighborhoods mainly concerns cooperation between schools and parents, with the support of social organizations, other kinds of organizations such as sport clubs, theaters, creativity clubs, but also the police and local citizens. First of all, schools and parents are important. At school, children learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, of course, but at school, children also learn social competences and democratic citizenship. Therefore, the schools create an educational line together with the parents, and they are backed up by social organizations and the police, who are accessible and deployed when necessary. Local residents are involved as volunteers. They are, so to say, the aunts and uncles of the neighborhood. They are not professionals, do not solve problems, but give attention and support to children, and they use their eyes and ears. I myself am active as volunteer in a theater group called Studio 50 Seconds that works with children and young adolescents. I have already supervised several children, and currently I'm the smart buddy of an 11-year-old boy. I'll end my part of our presentation with this example. Studio 52nd is a group of professional theatre makers and actors who work with children and juveniles. Main activities are playmaking and theatre making. Local residents are involved as a buddy to assist and give support to the children. Each child or juvenile has a buddy. We work one-on-one. Children learn to write plays, they learn to act, and they can learn everything about the theatre, the light and sound technology, building a decor, making costumes, receiving and guiding the public, etc. In this way, children are introduced to theatre as a way to express yourself, to give words to feelings, and to develop creativity. Especially for children in disadvantaged situations, this is an important chance to stimulate them and to make them feel they can do something, that they have talents, that they can be proud of themselves. For a child, when the play you wrote is actually played by professional actors, or to act yourself with a professional, it's a peak experience and an enormous boost for self-esteem. Some children get extra guidance. Then the smart buddy comes in. A smart buddy is a volunteer who works with a child for a couple of months and gives extra attention. Together, they do things the child likes that match with her or his interest and talents and contributes to the positive development of the child. Extra guidance can be needed, for instance, if parents have problems or in case the child is going through a difficult period. For instance, migrant children who just arrived, or a parent died, or a parent is imprisoned, and sometimes there is a case of domestic violence. Again, volunteers are not professionals, but they provide positive experiences in the child's life. And we see that this approach works. For many children, it means that later in life, they will make a positive choice and can think critically, have resilience, and become beautiful adults who make a valuable contribution to the society. I've told you about our approach to children in the free society, but also juveniles in the institutions are part of the society, and sooner or later they will come back to the society. So now it's time for my colleague and friend Marijke van Genabeek to introduce herself and tell about the approach in the juvenile correctional institutions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gerda, for introducing me. My name is Marijke van Genabeek. I'm a psychologist, and I'm working as a pedagogical director of state juvenile institutions in the Netherlands. Well, I'm talking about my own experience, and I also talk about my experience as a guest at one of the performances the group of Gerda did last week. And I think it's always very touching when you see children just talking about their own history, talking about their own life, and taking perspective in their own lives. For juveniles in a closed institution, that's very difficult because incarceration means the punishment itself. So when they have to start to renew themselves, to go on with their development, and to take perspective and responsibility for that what they were doing, that is very difficult. I want to take in mind to the total institutions of government already in the 60s. Well, he told us that closed institutions are the worst institutions to be free, to be autonomous. All your life is in one closed institution. So there is no division between education, leisure time, and life itself. And that makes it very difficult to develop autonomy, but also to let space and room for your own empathic feelings. what's going to happen, and we were learning from youngsters going into our institutions that they were very frightened when they're coming in. They don't look like that, but you must imagine when they're coming through the fences and the walls, coming into the big porch and entering a very strange situation where they do not know what's going to lead to, that can evoke negative emotions. It can even evoke stress, fear, and aggression. And it's very important to react on that in a proper way, but we don't always realize how difficult it is for our youngsters to establish themselves in our institutions. And mostly they go and look to other peers, and the chance is that they develop antisocial subculture. So what do we have to do to encounter that? A good treatment is better than a punishment. But how do we do that in closed institutions as ours? The self-determination theory says something about motivation. And motivation is very important to change and to realize what your life is heading to. But you can't do that without connection with others. So first the connection, then the correction. It's not the way around. And competence is about that you be aware what your abilities are and what space do you have to realize that. You need someone else to see that. And autonomy itself is the way that you can make choices again and to regret the choices you made and to make new choices. In our institutions, we talk a lot about a positive life climate because we think that despite of the closeness of our institutions, it's very important to create an atmosphere where youngsters are safe and where they get support, real support in the things they want to achieve. And then that they have perspective in what they can achieve so that they can learn things and not only learning from bright rainbows in the future, but learning from their own mistakes, learning who they are, learning to be themselves. So to learn to be autonomous again. The effect of positive climate, there's been a lot of research on that. And we know that a good positive life climate leads to more empathy. And empathy you need to get close to rehabilitation and to go to restorative detention. And the influence of staff can also be established only when the youngster has the feeling that the other one is genuinely listening to him. So it's a very important issue, this one. What are the conditions of a restorative detention? I call it restorative detention because it has to restore something and it has to make the way free again to future for a boy or girl. Less girls in our institution than boys, but nevertheless. We need a positive life climate. I already told you about that. They have to get familiar with guilt and shame. And that's a very difficult issue. I will come up to that. Stimulating empathy, learning from offenses, restoring self-confidence, restoring confidence of the social network, including family, but also that village Gerda was talking about. Recognizing risks and how to handle them. Practicing handling conflicts. Internal mediation, so when there are conflicts in the institution itself, how are they going to be solved? Restorative mediation, that can be a conference or writing a letter. And at the end, restorative resocialization. I worked with a boy who made a very hard offense to a bus driver. And he attacked this man with a knife. And then he came into the institutions, and a few years later, he was going out again. But he had to take the same bus to the island he was living on because the bus had to go on the boat and there was no other way to come there. Then you have to restore this relation somehow, not that they could be friends, but there is a restoration of the relation itself to be able to go on with the life, to take the bus again and going to home and to work. Guilt and shame, difficult words in an institution like us. because the youngsters have guilt and shame. And especially when they come in, the feeling of remorse can be very deep. But later on, when they're staying for a longer time, it can be that they see themselves more like victims, that is going to alter. So they're turning from perpetrator to a victim. And empathy with the victim or empathy with the offender is very important to change these roles, to be able to take perspective in that and to come to reconciliation at the end. We have a module and we teach this to the youngsters who come in shortly after they come in again. And we teach them to learn from the consequences to others, not from their own crime, but more in general. What does it mean to be a victim? And as Gerda told you already, most of our offenders are also victims themselves. So to be able to take perspective in two roles. It's very important, this one, because from this on, we can work further. We go further to look at the offense itself, to the crime itself, the crime scene scenario. It's a protocol to follow the crime itself. And then from that, we know what the risks are, and the boy learns what the risks are. And that can give a perspective on restoration and perspective on going on and functioning in a proper way in society. Learning of crime, this is the intervention I told you about. And at the end, you're going through the offense in time. So maybe in the hours before, maybe in the days before, what was happening? What did you feel? What did you think? What did you do? Was there a moment you wanted to go back, but you couldn't again? And this story, the boy learns to tell not only to himself, but also to others, to the staff, to the family who was invited at the end, but maybe also to the victim or to a representative from the victims itself. Restoring families. Not only restoring to the victim, that's a strange person, but mostly also there's a lot be wrong in the families itself. In the Ukraine, you have at the moment a good experience going on family conferences, but always also aiming at restoring the family bonds. It's very important because it is needed, the village is needed to go back again. Another issue I want to attend to is the connecting with the victim. In our society, more and more is an emphasis also on the victim. In court, in justice, the victim is playing a larger role than ever. And we have experience at this moment with very difficult crimes where the young children or young victims are involved. To look via an organization to look up with the victim or the parents who were left behind, not to make a connection with the offender and the victim itself immediately. Maybe it will be possible also in future, but just to take them with us during treatment. And also to learn the boy what's the consequence of what he did, but not to avoid the relationship, but to work with guilt and shame again, to restore. We do this often in media sensitive matters, because otherwise we got the media or the papers or the journals or the television going to have a lot of news about these issues. And now we keep it again between the victim and the offender itself. And it's a very, very difficult tragedy. It's very, very difficult to do, but it's worthwhile. At the end, we have good experiences, not only in the Netherlands, but all over the world, and especially in New Zealand, to go to restorative mediation. And then it can be possible to reunite at the end the victim, the offender, but all the others involved, the family, but maybe the village, maybe the theatre group, to restore again what went wrong and to give the youngsters a good entrance again in society. Because we must not forget that their development is going on while they are in closed institutions. The world is going on, and we don't want to exclude them, but we want to include them again. And that's our biggest challenge. So, going back to society to start again, but with the help of others, of us and of you. Okay, thank you.